In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can deploy a Django app to Google App Engine using Docker. What we're going to cover in this tutorial is first we're going to create a new Django project. And we're going to be setting it up with Docker, which we can use as our local development server. Then we're going to be creating a very basic placeholder app. And this is going to include a static page with an image on it and a style sheet so we can demonstrate using static files with Google App Engine. Then we're going to set up our Google Cloud account so that we can deploy to Google App Engine. And then we're going to be configuring our project for deployment to Google App Engine, again using Docker. And finally, we're actually going to deploy our app to App Engine. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is create a new directory on our system that we can use for our project files. So head over to the terminal, or if you're on Windows, the command prompt, and then navigate to the location where you want to create the project. So I'm going to do it in cd/document/workspace. And I am going to call the project deploy-django-GAE, short for Google App Engine, -docker. So I'm going to just make a directory here using the mkdir command, mkdir deploy Django GAE docker. Then I'm going to switch into that directory, cd deploy, and I'm going to initialize it as a Git project. Now this is optional. If you don't want to use Git, then you don't need to do this. I do recommend doing it though, because it helps keep track of the changes that we make to the project. So I'll do git init. And then I'm going to open the project up in my code editor by typing code dot, and this is just going to open up in Visual Studio Code. Of course, you can use whichever code editor you prefer to use when you're working on your coding projects. Now we've got our new project, we're going to add a gitignore file to exclude certain things from Git. Again, if you're not using Git, then you don't need to follow this step, but I'm just going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it .gitignore. And then I'm going to open up my browser where I have a link to the default Python gitignore file. I will also put this in the description of the list of resources for the video. And it's just a handy template for Python projects of a gitignore file. So I'm going to copy the contents of this. And then I'm going to go back to our project and I'm going to paste it in and then save the file. I'm just going to add one more item to the end here, which is /static. And save that, and I'm going to explain why we need that later on in the tutorial. Now we have our project set up, we can go ahead and add a requirements file for installing Django, which is going to be installed inside a Docker container. So I'm going to create a new file in the root here, and I'm just going to call it requirements.txt. And inside the requirements.txt, we're going to add two requirements. One is Django, and the other is gunicorn. So we'll type Django, and we're going to install more than equals 3.2, less than equals 3.3. And what this will do is it will install Django with the latest patch version of 3.2. So I like to do it this way, so every time we rebuild our Docker container, we get the latest patch version, which might contain some security fixes and so on. We're going to do the same, but for gunicorn. So I'm going to type gunicorn more than equal 20.1.0, less than equals 20.2. And gunicorn is going to be the WSGI server that we use on App Engine. So it's the default one that we use on App Engine for deploying Django or any Python application. Now save the requirements.txt file. And next we're going to move on to creating our Dockerfile. So let's go ahead and create a new file in the root of the project. And that file is going to be called Dockerfile. This is going to define the development server that we're going to be using. So we don't actually use the Dockerfile for the deployment. This is just used for our local development server. And there are many, many reasons why this is good practice to do. One of them being that you have a consistent development environment for all developers that work on your project. So this is my preferred way and the way I recommend creating all Django projects. We're going to start by defining the base image by typing from Python:3.9-Alpine. So Alpine is just a very lightweight version of Linux that is recommended when you're running Docker containers. So we use that as our base image. Then I'm just going to set label maintainer equals, and then londonappdeveloper.com. You can, of course, put your name or your email address or whoever the maintainer is of this Dockerfile that you are creating. Next, we need to copy the requirements.txt file to the Docker image when it is getting built. So we'll type copy.requirements.txt/requirements.txt. Then below that, we'll do copy./app/app, and then workdir/app. So what this does is when we build our image, the requirements file will be copied to the image and stored at /requirements. And then we will copy the contents of a folder called app. Now we haven't created that yet, but that's what we're going to be using for our Django app. And all of our Django code is going to be stored in there. And then finally, we set the workdir. So that's the working directory for our Docker container. So this is the directory that we are working from when we run commands on our container, and we switch it to /app just so that we don't need to use the cd or change directory command to change to it every time. Let's go ahead and create an empty folder here because otherwise our build is going to fail. So the folder is just going to be called app, and you want to make sure it is in the root of the project. And we're going to be populating this folder with some contents in a bit. Got these hairs everywhere. Next, we're going to add to our Dockerfile a run command that will set up a virtual environment for our dependencies, install our requirements, and also create a user for our Django application. So we'll do that by typing run and then python -m/venv/py. This is a new virtual environment and it places it in /py in the container. Then two and signs to add a new command, and then backslash, you want to have a backslash here. And then below that, we'll add a second command, which is /py/bin/pip install -r /requirements.txt. And then the double and signs again, backslash, and then add user -disabled -password -no -create -home Django -user. Let me just explain what this does. So the first line here is it creates a virtual environment called /py, so at the location on the image as /py. Then we run the pip install command, but we run it from this virtual environment by specifying the full path /py /bin /pip, and then install, and then the requirements file that we copied here on line 4. Then below that, we use the add user command, and we pass in disabled password and no create home because this isn't a Linux user that we're going to be logging in as. We're just going to be using it to run our application. And this step is optional, but it's recommended for security because you don't want your application having full root access over the image. And it's not really a big deal for our local development server, but just in case you do deploy this application to a production server at any point, you might want to have this in there just to be safe. Now we're going to add to the path, so the environment variable path in the Docker container. We're going to add a new entry for our virtual environment. So whenever we run Python, it runs from that virtual environment with all the requirements that we've installed there. So we can do that by typing env path equals, and then these double quotes, /py /bin and then $path. So this just adds a new entry to our path so that whenever we use Python, it uses it from this directory by default. Finally, we're going to type user, Django-user, and this ends the creation of our Dockerfile. And what this does is it just switches to the user that we created here. So anything we run after this, when we run our application, it's going to be running from Django user and not the root user on our Linux container. Okay, make sure you save the file, and now let's move on. The next thing we need to do is create a Docker compose file that is going to run Docker for our project. So in the root of the project, I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be called docker-compose.yml, YAML file. And then we're going to type version : 3.9 services : we're going to define a service called app. Before I do that, I'm just going to change my spaces to 2 spaces because I prefer using 2 spaces for YAML files. This is totally optional. It just makes it easier for me to read them. So underneath services, I'm going to type app : and then underneath that, I'm going to type build colon, and underneath that, I'm going to type context colon dot, and then level with the build line here, I'm going to type ports colon hyphen 8000 colon 8000. Then underneath that, volumes colon, and then hyphen dot / app colon / app. Then finally, we're going to add command colon python manage.py run server 0.0.0.0 colon 8000. So what this does is first we specify version 3.9. That's the version of the Docker Compose syntax that we're using, and it's the latest version at the time of making this video. Then we define our services block, and these are the services that we have defined in Docker Compose. The first service is called app, which is defined on line 4. And then we have underneath app build and then context colon dot, and that all that does is it says build based on the context of the current directory we're in, and that will be this directory. So it will by default use the Dockerfile in that directory. If we had a custom Dockerfile that was named something different, then we could specify that here in this build section here, but we just called it Dockerfile, which is the default. So just by setting the context, it will automatically use the Dockerfile that we created. Then below that, we map port 8000 in the container to port 8000 in our local machine. And this allows us to access the server via HTTP when we run our development server. Next, we have the volumes, and this maps a volume of our current directory app here, and it maps it into the running container. And what this does is it allows us to access the code in real time from the container. So when we make changes to our Django application, they will automatically be mapped and refresh the development server that is running inside Docker. Finally, we have the command, which is the Django run server command for starting the development server. And then we specify the port 8000 and we bind it on 0.0.0.0, which just makes it accessible on the network. So then we can map the port 8000 to the container and we can access it on our browser on the host machine. Now we've done that, we're going to save the file, and then we're going to open up our terminal, or if you're on Windows, you'll use either PowerShell or command prompt, whatever you're familiar with. And now we're going to run a command that is going to create a new Django project in our project. So we'll do that by typing docker-compose run --rm app sh-c, and then the quotation or double quotation marks, open them, and then Django-admin, and then start project, and then app, and then dot at the end. And before we close the command, we are going to add double quotation again. So what this does, it runs the Docker Compose command. We're using the run command, which is for running a single command on a container. Then we are specifying rm, which removes the container when it's finished running. It just prevents our machine from filling up with containers that we're not using anymore. Then we specify the name of the service, which is app, and that's the one we defined in dockercompose.yml. Then we have sh-c, which is just for running a single shell command on the container. And then in the quotes here, we pass in the command that we're running. So we're passing in Django admin, start project, app, and then dot. So Django admin is the CLI for Django when it's installed, and this allows you to start a project. Start project, as you imagine, is to start a project. App is the name of the project, and the dot says create the project in the current directory. So that's the working directory of the container. Then we close out the command, and this is all we need for creating our project. So let's hit enter on that, and hopefully it should build the container for us now, and then it should go ahead and create the project. If this is the first time you're running the command, then it's going to take a minute to download the required Alpine image from the Docker Hub, and then it will build the container, and then it will create the Django project. So this stuff happens the first time you run the command. When you run it subsequent times, so times after this, it should automatically be cached in the system, so it should be a lot faster, almost instantaneous. We'll just wait for this to finish, and then we'll continue. Now that this is finished, you can go back to the project, and if you click on app, you can see that it's created some template files here. So this is a basic Django project that is created for us with the Django command line tool. After this is done, we're ready to go ahead and test our development server. So go ahead and head over to the terminal or the command prompt or PowerShell window, and we're going to type docker-compose up. this should start an instance of our development server on our local machine. So you see something like this, and this means it has been successfully started. We can go over to the browser. So I'm just going to open up the browser here, create a new tab, and I'm going to go 127.0.0.1:8000, which is localhost on the machine. If we hit enter, you should see this page. So this is the placeholder page for a new Django project. And this is just because we haven't added any URLs or anything to it so far. So we're going to be doing that in a moment. So now that we have our Django project running in our development server, we can move on to the next step. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be creating an app inside our project. So Django projects are structured into multiple apps, and we're going to be creating a new app inside the project that we're just going to use to put our demo code. So we'll do that by heading back to the terminal, and you can push Control-C to stop the server here, or you can open a new tab or window and leave it running if you prefer. And then we're going to type docker-compose run --rm app sh-c, and then Python manage.py start app demo. And what this does is it uses the same syntax as before to run the container in Docker Compose, and we're passing in a slightly different command here. So this is Python manage.py start app demo. I'll just move this over here so you can see it. And what this does is it starts a new app in our Django project, and it's using the manage.py, which is created in the project when we run the start project command. I'm just going to open up the code editor here. So if we observe the code editor as we hit enter, I'm just going to shrink this down so you can kind of see both. You hit enter here. What should happen is it will go ahead and it will create a new directory in our project with the name of the app, which is demo. So here we have a new file here, or a new directory, and inside it we have a bunch of other different files that make up the Django app. So we're going to start by removing the ones that we don't need. So there are various of these that we aren't going to be using for this tutorial. One of them is migrations, so we'll delete that. Another one is admin.py, so we'll delete that. And then we have models.py, we'll delete that. And finally, tests. So we might cover using that in a future tutorial. If you're interested, then please leave a comment in the video below and let us know that you're interested in learning about databases with the Google App Engine, or whatever you're interested in. Let us know and we'll try and create some content around that. Okay, let's continue. What we're going to do now is just open up the app and then settings.py. And inside that, we need to add our new app to installed apps. So this way it will be picked up by Django as an app that is installed in our project. The way we do that is just add a new line below here and then just add a string using single quotes and type demo. So this is a new app that we're going to be adding to our project. Now if you save the file, and we can move on. Next, we're going to configure the static files for our project. So static files are things such as images, JavaScript, and CSS that is needed for our HTML templates that are rendered by Django. And the convention in Django is to store them within each app inside a directory called static. So inside demo, we're going to create a new directory called static. You can just go ahead and do that now, actually. Make sure it is in the demo app. And what you would do is you would add potentially multiple different apps to your project, or you may install external apps in your project that also have their own static files. So in order to serve them through Google App Engine, we need to use a command to collect all of the static files into one single location that we can then upload into Google App Engine in order to serve the static files. So this is how Django handles static files when you're using it in production. In order to collect all of the static files in one location, we use something called the collect static command. This is provided by default by Django applications, and we can use this to gather up all of the static files from every single app that's enabled in our project and copy it to a single location. But first, we need to tell Django where we want that location to be. So where do we want to store all of the static files that are being collected? We're going to store it in the root of the project in a directory called static that we're going to keep outside of Git, or keep outside of our source control. And we're going to use the collect static command before we do any deployment. We need to add a new line to the bottom of settings.py, and that is called static_root. And we're going to set the value equals, in quotes, /static. What this will do is when we run the collect static command, it tells Django we want all of the static files to be collected into the directory called /static. Because we're using Docker, that is going to be put inside a Docker container. So we need to create a volume inside Docker Compose in order to get those files accessible in the project. So when we run our deploy command from Google App Engine, they can be pushed up to Google App Engine. Let's save the settings.py file and then open up Docker Compose. And we just need to change one line here. So below the volume here where we have the app, we're going to add a new line, and it's going to look similar, but it'll be ./static: /static. So this says map any files or map the directory in our container at /static to the project and create a new directory called static there and map that content. So when we call collect static, Django will store all of them where we specify it here in the static root, which is /static, and then Docker Compose will map a volume from that directory here to the directory in our project. Save the Docker Compose file, and now we can move on. Next, we're going to be creating a template page that we can use to deploy. So inside our demo /static directory, and it's very important that you make sure the static directory is inside demo. I know we have a lot of different files and directories here. It's important to make sure that they're inside the correct nesting. So you want static to be inside demo, which should be inside app here. We're going to add a new file inside static, and that file is going to be called style.css. And then we're just going to add a simple CSS file to style our page. And we'll start by defining body and open up the braces, and then font-family. We'll use the Arial option here, so Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. And then color, we'll set the font color to FFF, which is just white. Text-align to center, we'll center everything in the page. And then background color, 3D, which is just a dark gray. Then below that, we'll do img, which will handle the image styling. And we'll do border-radius, 3px, and then border 1px solid white. So this is just some basic CSS. I am far from a professional designer, so if you want to make it look prettier than this and you want to use your CSS skills, then go nuts here, because you can basically do whatever you want at this point. Now we're going to choose an image and store that in our project. So I've provided a link to an image in the resources of the video. Feel free to use that image or whatever image you want, really. And we're basically going to save this image, and we're going to save it in the project inside our directory. So I'm going to do workspace and then the deploy Django GA Docker. And then I'm just going to put this inside demo and then inside static. So we have river sunrise, call this .jpg in case it doesn't add that automatically. Okay, so now we have river sunrise.jpg, which is just an image that we're going to put in the page that we create for our template. Now we can go ahead and create a HTML template file. So we'll do that by creating a new directory inside demo, or we'll create a new file inside demo. And if you're using an editor like mine, you can create the directories and subdirectories as you go. So inside demo, we want it to be called templates, then /demo, then /demo.html. So templates is just the standard name for all the HTML templates that you create in Django. Then you need to specify the name of the app again. And this is just a limitation of Django, the way that it collects up or identifies the different templates. You need to specify the name of the app for the template, and you do this in a subdirectory of the templates directory. Then you can open up the demo.html file, which is just the name of the template. We're going to add some contents here. So I'm just going to add a basic HTML file. But we'll start by using the load static tag, which allows us to load static files inside our Django template. So we'll do that by using these squiggly brackets here. And then we want to do 2% signs. And inside that, we're going to type load static. Then below that, we're going to add the document HTML tag. And then below that, we're going to add HTML lang equals en, And then inside that we will do, I'm just going to change my spaces to 2 again because I prefer the smaller spaces, easier to read. And then we have head, title, Django GAE placeholder, and then link rel equals style sheet, href equals, we will add here the syntax for retrieving a static file, which is these open and close squiggly brackets, and then the % signs, and then static, and then style.css. So what this will do is it will get the URL, so the path for the style.css static file, and it will automatically map that for us in Django. And you're going to see how this works in a bit. Then we're just going to close the link tag here, close the head tag, and then create a body tag. And inside the body tag, we'll just add some contents here. So h1 Django GAE placeholder page, and then below that P, we'll just say here's a sunrise. And below the P tag, we'll add img src. And again, we're going to use the same syntax here for getting the static file. So static, and then river-sunrise, sunrise.jpg, and then just close the tag out here. And if you save that file, the next thing we're going to do is just create a view, and we'll do that by opening up the project, and again, making sure we're opening up views.py inside the demo app. And we're just going to add a simple view here, so we'll type def demo request, and then return render request demo/demo.html. demo.html. And this just simply has a single line view, which is a function that this is the entry point that the URL maps to in Django. So when we make a request to our URL, it's going to call this function, which is then going to return the render function. It's going to call the render function here, pass in the request, which is just the request object. It has all the details about the request that's being made. And we're going to render this template. So it's the template demo/demo.html. You can save that. And the next step is to actually connect this up to a URL so we can go ahead and test it. So we'll open up the app directory here. So app/app. This is the kind of project configuration for our project. And then we'll open up urls.py. And inside urls.py, we are going to add a new line here below the imports. And we're going to do from demo import views. So from our demo app, we're going to import the views that we have created our view in. Then in the URL patterns here at the bottom, we're going to add a new line, it's path, and we'll just add an empty string. So we'll handle the kind of root path for our project, and then comma views.demo. So this said, whenever we get the URL for the root of the project, call the views.demo function, which will then go ahead and call the function inside views.py and return the render function here, which should theoretically render our template. If you go back to urls.py, just make sure you've saved the file here. Now open up the terminal or the PowerShell, whichever command line you're using, and do docker-compose up. And this will create the development server again. And then we're going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to head over to the 127.0.0.1.8000, hit enter. You should see the placeholder page that we have created. So this is a very basic Django app that just renders a single page, and this is what you should see on the screen. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to set up our project to toggle debug mode. So if you head over to the project in Visual Studio Code, you open up settings.py, and you scroll to the top, what you should see here is there is a debug equals true. Now, it says above it a warning. It says don't run with debug turned on in production. And the reason for this is that the debug mode is intended for just developers working on the project. And all it does is when the project crashes, it allows you to see lots of information about the crash, and all of this information should help you debug what the problem is. However, this is not good for production because it helps attackers or potential attackers get more information about your app than they need. So this could help them find vulnerabilities in your app, so on. So the best practice is when you deploy your application, whether it's to Google App Engine or any service that you're deploying to, you want to make sure this is set to false. But when you're using it locally, you want it to be true. So I find the best way to do this is to use an environment variable to toggle the debug mode. We can do that by adding a new import to the top of the file, import OS. And then we're going to replace this true here. I'm going to change it to bool, and then open and close the brackets. We're going to call the bool function, which is the Boolean function. Then int, open and close brackets, os.environ.get, and then inside the get parameters, or the arguments that we pass in, is going to be debug as a string, comma, 0. So what this does is we get the environment variable called debug, and if it isn't set, it doesn't exist, we're going to default to 0. So by default, we're not going to enable debug mode. Then we convert that to an integer using the int function. And the reason we do this is because all environment variables are always strings. So even if you set it to a 1 or a 2, it's going to come in as a string. And this is going to confuse us when we convert it to a Boolean because we want it to be a 0 to be false and 1 to be true. Once we've converted it to an integer using the int function, we then convert it to a Boolean, which converts it to a true or false value. So 0 converts to false and 1 converts to true. Now that we've updated the debug configuration, there's one more thing we need to do, and that is to modify this allowed hosts. So allowed hosts is a feature that is provided by Django, which is designed to protect against header attacks. So there's a certain type of attack that they can do on the Django application, and this could be avoided by specifying the specific host names that are allowed to access your application when it's not in debug mode. And the way you normally do it is you would define the different host names here. So you would provide a list of all the host names. It could be app.example.com or whatever the host name is for the Django project. And then only that host name would be allowed to access the app when it's running in production. However, Google App Engine, apparently, according to their documentation, has a built-in protection against this, and their recommended approach is to allow a wildcard, so allow all hosts in the Django configuration, because that protection is done at the Google App Engine layer. So this is okay when you're deploying to Google App Engine, but it's not okay if you're deploying to any other type of deployment. So if you're deploying in any other way, you want to make sure you specify your allowed hosts. Whereas because we're using Google App Engine, we can just put an asterisk here in a string, and this will allow hosts from any host, and Google App Engine will protect us against the header attacks. So save the settings.py file, and then we are going to head over to dockercompose.yml, and you can navigate to it here if you want. Open up that file, and we're going to add the environments block to the bottom of the file. So we'll do environment : -debug equals 1. So this means when we run in Docker Compose, it's going to set debug to 1 so that we have debug mode enabled when we're running our development server locally. But if it's running and debug equals 1 is not set, it is going to disable debug mode, which will be when we're running on App Engine. So save the project, and just to make sure it's working okay, you're going to need to close out of the server. So you can do that by doing Control-C if your server's still running. Mine's not. And then you can run docker compose up, and it should restart the Django development server. And just to make sure it is all working okay, once it starts, open up your browser and just refresh the page. Okay, so everything's working as expected so far. The next thing you want to do is sign up to Google Cloud Platform if you haven't already signed up. When you sign up, you should see this My First Project as a default project that's created. Now don't worry if your screen looks a little bit different from mine. It's possible that you're just at a different stage in the kind of registration process. If you've got a brand new account, you should have My First Project. If you already have an existing account and you have a project on there that you've used for something else, I recommend creating a fresh project just for this demo so that we can make sure there's no conflicts or issues with the code. So if you need to do that, you can click on the drop down here and you can create new project, and you can go ahead and fill out the form here, and this will go and create you a new project. Once that's done, make sure you have the project selected. So in my example, I'm going to be using My First Project. And the next step is to enable Google App Engine. So if you click on this hamburger stack here, navigation menu, you should be able to locate App Engine underneath the serverless section of the left-hand navigation. When you click that for the first time on a new project, you should be taken to this page here. So this page allows you to enable a new App Engine project. If you've already enabled App Engine, then you won't need to complete this. You only need to do it once for each project that you want to use App Engine on in your Google Cloud platform. We're going to click on Create Application, and then we need to specify a region. So I'm going to specify a region near me. It's recommended that you use whichever region is local to you, or more importantly, local to the users that will be using your application. It's important to remember that as of the time of creating this video, you cannot change the region once it's been set. So if you create it in the wrong region and you want to change the region, the only option you have is to delete the project and create a brand new project in the region that you want. Once you specified the region, you can click on Create App. This will go ahead and create the Google App Engine app. It's going to ask you the language and the environment. So we're going to use Python because that's what we're deploying here. And we're going to use the standard environment. So there are two different options here, standard and flexible. Standard is the best one in most cases. And what standard is it basically means that Google is managing the servers entirely for you. You cannot connect to the server that is running the code that you push to App Engine. And this is good in a lot of cases because you don't need to worry about the management overhead of that server. You don't have to apply security fixes. You never have to log into it and install dependencies or worry about it if it breaks. This is all taken care of by Google. And this is one of the amazing things of using App Engine is it totally removes that overhead of having to maintain servers, which can be a headache because you need to maintain them, make sure they get the latest patches and fixes and so on. However, if you do want to maintain the server because you do need to for whatever reason, it could be because you need some kind of bespoke dependency running on the server. There are various different reasons. You would choose flexible, but that's kind of like an advanced tutorial. So we're not going to be covering that here. We're just going to be using the standard environment, and it's what I recommend in most cases. Once you've selected that, you can click on Next. And then this will take you to this page here, which gives you some tips for getting started. So kind of next steps. We're not going to need them here because we're going to be doing that in this tutorial. So you can just click on I'll do this later. We'll take you to this page that says URL not found. And this is because we haven't deployed anything to App Engine just yet. The next step is to configure our project to actually be able to deploy to App Engine. So we can do this by opening up our project. And we're going to create a new Docker Compose file here in the project. So I'm going to close all of these. And I'm just going to shrink these down so you can see the full view. And I'm going to create a new file here in the root of the project. It's very important it's in the root of the project. And you're going to type docker-compose-deploy.yml. This is going to include the Docker Compose configuration for our deployment. Now you might be wondering, why do we need so many Docker Compose files? Isn't this just a whole lot of overhead without much benefit? I would disagree. I would say that there are lots of benefits to this small amount of overhead in comparison. One of the main benefits is that you can isolate the dependency of the Google Cloud SDK from your local machine. So you don't have to have it installed locally. You can use it through Docker, and therefore you can create a reproducible environment for all the developers on your project. I've worked on many projects that developers had to spend days, if not weeks, setting up their machine because they have to have different versions of the Google Cloud SDK for different projects. They're working on multiple projects and there's all these different configurations that takes a long time to figure out and can get very confusing, especially when you're working in a professional environment. So I always recommend doing everything through Docker so you can have that consistency for your project and you can control the versions that you're using of the different tools that are needed for your deployments. This way you don't get one developer saying, oh, I can't do deployments because I don't have the right dependency on my machine or I have a conflict or something. Everyone can do it. No one has an excuse. It's all set up as long as they have Docker installed. So inside this Docker Compose deploy.yaml, we're going to create a new configuration specifically for the deployment process. So what we need to do is start with version -3.9 and services : and I'm just change this to 2 spaces. And the first service, or the only service we're going to need, is gcloud. I'm going to talk you through what each line does in a moment. Let's just type it out first. We use image : Google/cloud-SDK : 338.0.0. Then volumes : hyphen GCP hyphen creds / creds, or creds plural with an S, and then dash dot and then colon / app. Working, and then level with volumes, so we need to make sure we're level with volumes here. Actually, I got the indentation a little bit wrong here, so let's just indent this volumes. This volumes should be level with image, and it should all be underneath gcloud. The indentation is very important with the YAML files. Below volumes, we're going to have working _ dir colon / app, and then environment colon dash cloud SDK _ config equals / creds. And it's very important this is spelled exactly as I typed it here. So cloud SDK _ config equals / creds. Now finally, we're going to add a new block at the bottom here. So delete the tabs all the way to the beginning of the file. I'm going to type volumes colon and then GCP hyphen creds, and then a colon at the end. So it might seem strange, but there's a reason for this. We'll just save the file, and now I'll talk you through it. So first we have the syntax version of Docker Compose 3.9, then our services block, and then the service gcloud, which is based on the image Google / cloud -SDK, and then version 338.0.0, which we're pulling in via a tag. Now you could change this version here to just latest. So if you deleted 338 and changed it to latest, it would use whatever the latest version is at the time of putting the container. However, sometimes this can be a problem because if there are any breaking changes that would break your deployment that are deployed to the SDK, then you might want to be in control of being able to manually increase the version and make sure you can test it and that nothing breaks before you go ahead and do that. And that just helps you to keep the stability of your project up. But if you do like living life on the edge and you want to use the latest version all the time, feel free to change this to latest and you'll get the latest version of the Cloud SDK. Next, we have volumes, and we're mapping a volume here called GCP creds. So because we don't have any dot or / before GCP creds, this maps to a named volume, which we've named below here. Now what this does is it creates a volume with Docker Compose for our credentials that we'll use to authenticate with Google App Engine. And the reason we do this is just so that every time we run our Docker container, we don't need to authenticate again. So it allows us to have a persistent set of credentials that we can use for the project until we delete the volume manually. And this is quite useful to do in a project because it helps you to save a lot of time from authenticating multiple times. We're mapping it to a directory inside the container called /creds. And then we have another volume here which maps the root of our project. So just having a dot here maps the root of our project. So everything inside our project directory into the /app directory inside the container. And this is needed because the Cloud SDK needs access to this in order to deploy our app. Then we specify working dir, that's the working directory, and we do it to /app. And then the environment, so we set an environment variable Cloud SDK config. This tells the Cloud SDK to store all of our credentials inside our /creds directory, which is mapped to the volume here. Then here we map the volume, so this tells Docker Compose to create a new volume specifically for this project that we can use to store the credentials. Now we have the Docker Compose that will give us access to the Cloud SDK. We can go ahead and create an app.yaml file in the root of the project. So we'll do app.yaml, and it's important to use the YAML. So there are two different types of name that you can give a YAML file. One is just YML and one is YAML. The Google Cloud SDK likes the longer version here, so they're both the same file extension, just one's a longer version, and the Google Cloud SDK prefers YAML. I don't think it would work if you just put YML. Feel free to try that, but I don't think it would work, so make sure you do YAML. Now this is going to define our App Engine deployment. This is where we put all of the details that tells App Engine how to actually run and serve our application. So at the top here, we're going to type runtime Python 3.9, which uses the Python 3.9 runtime, which is the latest at the time of making this video. Then we specify entry point, and we type gunicorn -b : and then $port --chdr app /app.wsgi : application. The entry point is the command that App Engine will run to start our project. So we're going to use gunicorn here. We're going to pass in -b, which I believe stands for bind. So we're going to bind to the port in the environment variable port, and this is set automatically by Google App Engine. Then we have chdir, which is change directory, and this tells gunicorn to run from the app directory that is going to be pushed up to the Google App Engine file system that is going to contain the Django project that we're running. Then we specify the WSGI file. So when you create a Django project inside app/app, see you have this wsgi.py. You need to tell it where that is located within app. So if you're already in the app directory, it's located in app.wsgi. And then we run this application here. So this is all automatically generated by Django. You don't need to manually change anything inside the WSGI file. So that tells App Engine how to run the project. Next, we need to define the handlers. So this is how does App Engine handle the URLs when people make requests to Google App Engine. So I'm going to add a space here. It's totally optional. You don't have to add a space. I just like to keep it neat and tidy. We do handlers, : and then dash URL : /static. And then below that, static _dir : static /. And then below that, we're going to add a second URL, which is same level with this URL underneath handlers .url : /. And then the asterisk symbol here, the wildcard asterisk. Then below that, we're going to do script : auto. Okay, save the file. I'm just going to talk you through these handlers here. So as I said, handlers handle the URL requests made to the app that's running an App Engine. So we have URL, and this is the URL for capturing all the static URLs. So the static files in our project, they're all going to start with /static. So we can tell App Engine anything that starts with /static, serve it directly from the static directory static /. So this is the one that's going to be created when we run our collect static command. And it's going to be uploaded to Google App Engine. And this means all the static files can be rendered directly without having to run through the WSGI service, because the WSGI service is ideal for serving Python code, but not serving static files. So if you want to serve them efficiently, you need to serve the static files separate outside of the WSGI command here that we're running in gunicorn. Finally, we have this wildcard. So this says any other URL that hasn't already been matched. So anything that is not static, we're going to send it to the entry point script. So we're going to use the auto script, and this will run the gunicorn command here. So this says anytime there's a URL that isn't static, it must be a Python code that needs to be executed. So pass it through the gunicorn request, and then that will return the result of the page. So we can save the file, and now we can move on. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a gcloudignore file. So inside the files of the project, make sure it's in the root of the project. Going to add .gcloudignore. And here we're going to add all of the files we want to exclude from App Engine. So these are the things we don't want to be uploaded to App Engine. By default, the Google Cloud SDK will upload everything. We don't need everything. We only need to give it the bare minimum it needs in order to run the code. So that includes the static directory that we have here. It's going to have our static files, and then the app directory. So we basically need to list every other file. We'll start by .git, then .gitignore, then __py cache __/. So any py cache files that are these hidden files that are created here, we want to exclude them because they'll be generated by App Engine when the code is run. And then /setup.cfg. This is in case we add a setup script to the file. We're not going to do that, but this is just a kind of standard file that we want to create. Then docker compose.yml, docker-compose-deploy.yml, and then Dockerfile, makefile, and readme.md, just in case you add these files to the project. We don't currently have them, but it's just good to have them here in case we do add them. So save that, and that's everything we need to do to set up the project. Now we're going to move on to actually deploying the application. Before we deploy, we need to authenticate with Google Cloud in the SDK. So this we only need to do one time before we do a deployment, and then we don't need to do it subsequent times because, as I explained earlier, the credentials will be cached in a volume that are going to be reusable for the project. So to authenticate, we're going to open up the terminal. I'm going to open up a new tab here. You can feel free to close the Docker Compose server and then just use that one. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to do docker-compose. Just going to expand this here so you can kind of see the full line. Docker compose -f docker-compose-deploy.yml run --rm and then gcloud, which is the name of the service, sh-c and then gcloud auth login. So this is the command for running a Docker Compose command. It's quite long. If you're worried about the length, then you can always create a makefile which has some shortcuts. If you click on the blog post that accompanies this video, I have an example of a makefile that you can use in there. That simply just reduces the different commands down to just make login or make deploy, so you don't have to type this every time. But for this video, we're just going to type it out just so we can kind of learn what the commands are. Here we have Docker Compose. We're telling it to use the Docker Compose deploy.yaml file. Then we're using run, removing the container after we run the command. We're calling the gcloud service, and then we're passing in sh-c gcloud auth login. So this is the Cloud SDK command for logging in to the cloud account. So hit enter, and the first time you run it, it's probably going to pull the container down, and this can take a few minutes depending on your internet speed. Once this is done, it should be cached on your local machine, so it only happens the first time you run it. Every time you run it after that, it should be a lot faster because the image is already there, ready to just be run. We're going to wait for this to finish, and then we're going to continue. Once the command finally finishes running and the image is downloading, you should see a screen like this. So this contains a URL that we can use in order to authenticate with Google Cloud to access our Google Cloud platform via our account. We're going to copy the contents of this and then open up the browser. And then in a new tab, we're going to paste it in. And it will ask you what account you want to authenticate with. So we're going to choose the account. And then it will ask you to confirm that you want to give access to the account. So this is allowing you basically full access to the Google Cloud platform that you are authenticating for. So we're going to click on allow because that's what we need in order to deploy to App Engine. Then you're given this code. So this is like a random code that we can use to complete the authentication process. And we can do it by clicking on copy here, heading over to the terminal, pasting the value of the code and hitting enter. This will go ahead and complete the authentication. So here you can see that we are logged in, and this means we're now authenticated, and the credentials for this will be stored inside the GCP-creds volume that we set up in Docker Compose. So I'm just going to clear this screen, and now that we're authenticated, we can move on to the next step, which is actually deploying to Google App Engine. There are two commands we need to run in order to complete the deployment. So the first is collect static. So this is the command I was talking about, which is a Django command for collecting all of the static files needed for our project in one single location. If we open up the project, and then we can see the static directory is already created here. This was created when we run our container last because it maps a volume and it creates it automatically. So we're going to just run the command by typing docker-compose run --rm app sh-c and then python manage.py collect static. Make sure you spell it correctly. Collect static. Hit enter, and this will go ahead and run the collect static command. So what we should see here is after a minute, it should gather everything together, and you can see it populating the files now. So here are all of the static files for the different apps we have. So this is the River Sunrise and the style.css that was taken from our demo. And you might wonder, well, why don't you just put them directly in there? Well, it's because there are various different apps in your project, and you want to make sure as you add more apps, they can easily be curated in one location when you run this command, which is typically part of the deployment pipeline. You can see here we have admin, and this is for the Django admin app that is automatically installed for all new projects. We're not actually going to be using it, but it's actually included it because we still have it in installed apps in our project configuration. But the point is that the collect static command collects up all of the static files and puts them in one place. Now we can run the actual deploy command for Google App Engine. Do that by typing docker-compose -f docker-compose-deploy run --rm gcloud sh-c, and then open the quotes here, gcloud app deploy --project. And now we need to head over to the web browser again, so the console that has the Google Cloud, and we should be logged in here. You can get the project ID by clicking on the project drop down here and choosing the ID for the project you want to deploy to. So we're using my first project. So I'm going to copy this ID here, copy that to clipboard, head back to terminal, and paste it in here after the project. So what we do here is you run the docker compose command with our deploy.yaml configuration. We're passing in rm so that we remove the container when it's finished running, using the gcloud service, and then sh-c, which is to run a single shell command when we run the container. And we're calling gcloud app deploy, which is the command in the Cloud SDK for deploying to Google App Engine. And then we specify the name of the project by doing --project and the name of the project we're deploying to. Once this is all typed out, you can hit enter, and this will go ahead and start the deployment. So we should see that happening now, and it can take a moment. It will ask you if you want to confirm that you want to deploy. I'm going to hit Y for yes, hit enter. Now it should start the deployment. So you can see it's uploading all these files. This includes all of the static files, all of the Python files inside our app, and it's uploading them to the Google App Engine file storage, and then it's going to be able to actually run our application, or at least hopefully it should be able to run our application. We'll find out in a minute. Let's just wait for that to finish, and then we'll continue. Going to change these batteries out. Hopefully it keeps running, because I'll be pissed. Oh, actually we should be good. We got 2 bars. Keep an eye on that. If I lose volume now, I'm going to be angry. Okay, you can see now that the deployment has completed successfully. The first time I ran this before I recorded this video, I got an error saying the cloud build API was not enabled. I think this was just a glitch in App Engine, because the first time I ran it, it gave that error, and then when I ran it again, the error just went away and it didn't happen again after that. So I think it was just a issue with the App Engine SDK for when you're deploying. So if you do get that, then just run the command again, and hopefully you don't get it again once the kind of API has had time to enable itself in the cloud project. Now that the deployment's done, you should see a URL here. So you see deployed service default. You can copy the contents of the URL and open up the browser, paste it in a new tab, and we should see the app work if everything worked correctly. Now there's a chance that there was an error somewhere and it doesn't work, but you can see that here it works correctly. We have our app now deployed to Google App Engine. So every time you need to run a deployment, you need to run the 2 commands for collect static and then the app deploy command. And you can consolidate these into a shell script, or you can add these to your continuous deployment tool like GitHub Actions or whatever if you don't want to type them out every time. Some people just like to create a make file. And as I said earlier, there's an example of the make file in the blog post that accompanies this tutorial. So that's how you deploy a simple Django app to Google App Engine using Docker. I hope you found this useful. If you have any feedback or comments, then please leave them in the comments below. They always generate an interesting discussion, and hopefully we can learn from each other. If there's anything else you would like to learn about this process, like for example how you can handle Django migrations or how you can integrate with the cloud data store, then please comment below and let me know so I can figure out what content to create next, because there's so many different options that you can do from this point, and it's good for me to get a guide from you as to what you're interested in learning. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.